From close allies to rivals, the United Arab Emirates says it's pulling its troops out of Yemen. That's after an ultimatum by the Saudi-backed Yemeni Presidential Council. After a decade of alliance, what's triggered this rupture? And where does it leave its plans in war-torn Yemen? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. It began more than a decade ago. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were the pillars of a coalition created to fight the Houthis who'd taken control in Yemen. Over the years, that mission failed. Then the UAE set out to pursue its own long-term interests by supporting and arming a group called the Southern Transitional Council in the south of Yemen. Many accuse Abu Dhabi of creating a de facto breakaway power there with the aim of splitting the country in two. But Riyadh stepped in to disrupt what it saw as a national security threat after the council took control of areas close to its borders. The UAE was given 24 hours notice to leave Yemen, which it agreed to. But will that end the standoff between the two Gulf countries, and what does it all mean for the future of Yemen? We'll discuss all of this with our guests in a moment, but first this report from Imogen Kimber.
Protests in Yemen's strategic southern port of Aden against the United Arab Emirates removing its remaining forces from the country. The UAE is responding to a call by the internationally recognised and Saudi-supported government in Sana'a.
While we appreciate the previous role the UAE played as a member of the coalition, unfortunately it has become directed against our great people, as evidenced by its explicit support for the rebellion and its encouragement of internal strife.
Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council is an 8-member collective created in 2022 as a power-sharing mechanism backed by Saudi Arabia, as is the call for the UAE to leave Yemen. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been fighting the Houthis in Yemen and are technically part of the same coalition. But Saudi Arabia wants a single Yemeni state, while the UAE has been backing the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, that wants to recreate a separate southern state like that which existed before Yemen's unification in 1990. This month, the STC's forces made rapid advances in southern and eastern Yemen and took parts of Hadramout and Al-Mahra. These areas have strategic ports and oil and are close to the border with Saudi Arabia, which says this threatens its security. This prompted Saudi's strike on the port in Mukalla in Hadramout, which it says the UAE is using to supply weapons to the STC. The UAE rejected Riyadh's allegations. And although it is pulling out its remaining troops, it hasn't said whether it will stop funding the STC that aims to keep fighting for the south. Tensions between the two regional powerhouses are extremely high. Stability in Yemen is under threat, and because of its location, so is access to the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Straits that's crucial to global shipping. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests to discuss all of this further. From Riyadh, we have Abdul-aziz Al-Ghashian, is a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. From Cairo, Alkharder Sulaiman is the Southern Transitional Council's Foreign Affairs Community Liaison. And from London, Andreas Krieg is Associate Professor at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today on Inside Story. Let's start at the beginning. This long-running conflict, normally when we're talking about it, we're talking about the Houthis, the group that took over large swathes of the country 11 years ago. But here we are talking actually about the two regional powers that are fighting the Houthis, and they now seem to be fighting each other, Andreas.
No, right. I think you can go back even further in time. But I think what's quite significant here is this war, the Saudi-led war against the Houthis, started in 2015 with a very broad Gulf coalition. The Saudis were in the lead. And it very quickly became clear that what the Emiratis were doing in the south of Yemen was really not about fighting the Houthis, but consolidating power in key choke points along the coastline to secure some access to maritime trade routes. And so since very early on in 2015, it becomes clear that the Saudis are left to fight the war pretty much on their own against the Houthis, while the the Emiratis and the aligned forces the Emiratis were then engaging at the time, out of which the STC, the Southern Transitional Council, eventually emerged, were doing their own thing, which was mostly about consolidating their interest and also acting upon what was the Hirak al-Janubi, the southern movement, and kind of consolidating power around this old dream of reconstituting southern Yemen as it was known until 1990.
Abdul-aziz, I mean, as Andres has said, as he's given us a useful context for this, there have been tensions between the UAE and Saudi Arabia for some time. Things have been simmering. There have been clashes between proxy forces. But is it fair to say it's all out in the open now?
Well, firstly, Happy New Year's, and thank you very much for having me. So I think the situation, just to echo what everyone is saying, is that it has been simmering for some time. And I think some people may not be surprised that it reached this level now where it is very much out in the open. Personally, I was someone who was debating when maybe this will take place. I saw the situation and the rhetoric with both states gradually kind of begin to point the finger at each other on some things. And then it just seemed to me that this could be a matter of time till it really spills out into the open, and then the public, or I won't say the official discourse, begins to then change. The whole non-official discourse was there for some time, but the official discourse is something that we have to also look at, because it really signifies a particular juncture. And I think for me, and for anybody else, really, it's very clear that I think that move, I think that maneuver and that operation to seize Hadramout by the STC and basically going out of a political framework and going out of a regional agreed framework is something that I think the Saudis found to be unacceptable. I think they realized that this is now crossing the red lines of their own national security. And I also sense that there was probably that the Saudi ruling elite sense that maybe people assumed that the Saudis will just take it and maybe accept the reality on the ground. And that's why there were these reactions. The reaction was gradual, it was measured, and it was, you could see that it was very methodical, focusing on the political discussions, focusing on the political frameworks, the regional frameworks, and then using the military measured operation to send signals, not really to destroy anything, but to send signals and to say this is a red line and a red lines should not be crossed. That was that's how we got here. And I don't think it's the end of the bickering. I hope it is, but I don't think so.
OK, I'd like to examine some of those military developments that have happened recently in a moment. But Alkharder, you represent the Southern Transitional Council. They are key to all of this, a key player in it. So let's just go back a bit. Your group, the Southern Transitional Council, what do you want? And are you a force in your own right or just a proxy for the United Arab Emirates?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thanks to you, and Happy New Year to you, your guests, and all the listeners. Well, there's a few misconceptions that we should clear up before answering or getting into your question. One major misconception that needs to be clarified is the fact that UAE and Saudi Arabia have been having tensions. That is incorrect. They have actually been working together hand in hand while dividing roles, such as the Saudis who have led the air campaign.
Alkharder, hang on a minute. I mean, I look at some of the statements in recent hours and days. The statement from Saudi Arabia said the steps taken by the UAE are considered highly dangerous. They're not getting on very well, are they?
Well. I mean, we're going back right now into the beginning of the Arab coalition, and since the beginning, if you're following the Yemen file, since the beginning of the Arab coalition, you'll know that there has been a division of roles where the UAE has been more on ground, more building capacity, working with the local forces, while the Saudi Arabia has been more with state and with diplomatic approach, the air campaign, and as well as the reviving of the legitimate or the internationally recognized government. Now, they've attempted.
Can I come back to my question now, though, just so that our viewers understand who you represent? The Southern Transitional Council. Explain to us what you actually want, and are you just a proxy for the Emirates?
Well, here's the thing, and the other misconception that I was getting to is that the Southern movement has been there long before the UAE or the Arab coalition, and the Southern movement dates back to the '94 Civil War, which became an outright occupation, and then a Southern movement had an uprising in 2007, and then ever since then it just has been growing and growing. Those calls for secession have been growing since then. And then when the 2014 coup happened in Sana'a, that became the opportunity for Southerners to become a resistance. And that gave birth to a Southern forces, which then gave birth to a Southern political body. And
okay,
so,
to be clear for us, we've got a lot to get through. To be clear, do you want independence?
Of course, STC has been a major component and a viable partner to the legitimate government while upholding their goals and their demands by upholding the people's aspirations, which is to gain their self-determination and independence. And since the STC has been bringing out these massive million-person rallies, these actually stand as a mandate or that of a actual referendum. There's no other
let me bring in Andreas on this point, because I think perhaps you can add the historical context here, Andreas, of the South, because Yemen was a divided country for much of its history. In fact, a fully united Yemen only existed from 1990 to 2014, so just 24 years, if you don't count all the conflict period we've had since then. I mean, it is genuinely popular in the South, is it not, this idea? And yet most of the international community want Yemen as one country.
Well, it's a bit more complex than that. I completely agree with the STC spokesperson here. It is an organic movement. I think the Southern cause has a very big mandate, but it hasn't been referended properly. It's also questionable whether the STC because yes, it was always there, the Southern movement, but the STC was basically put into existence by a midwife called the UAE. So it is a UAE proxy in that sense, but it is representing organic cause. Now, the organic cause, whether the STC has the only monopoly over that cause is questionable. We don't have a referendum yet. The problem here is, though, we need to understand what's good for regional stability and for Yemeni stability. And I think in this context, the SDC's quite selfish proclaim of saying to be a separatist element or asking for secession doesn't take into account what would happen to the rest of the country, doesn't take into account what would happen to northern Yemen, to the Houthi occupied territory, as well as those territories still held by PLC entities. So what you end up with, if the SDC was really going for separation, is 2.5 Yemens, where you have a north occupied by the Houthis, a south from the SDC, and a sort of middle sort of buffer zone that the Saudis hold. And the problem with that is not viable. It's not viable for the SDC to hold that territory because it will create instability all over the rest of Yemen, and it will create instability in Arabia and in the Arabian Peninsula, which none of the Gulf states really can acknowledge, and the international community has no interest. And so the problem here is if the SDC is going it alone, leaving the Saudis and the GCC outside of Abu Dhabi alone to fight the Houthis, this is a massive present to the Houthis. You're actually allowing the Houthis to consolidate, making Saudi look weak, as well as looking the GCC look weak. And in the end, you end up with an entity in the south that I don't think is going to be viable without integrating into a broader Yemen. What I think is a good way forward would be a national dialogue, including all groups, including the Houthis, bringing the Omanis in as a consolidating force as well, to bring everyone around the table and allow people to find out what a united Yemen could look like. It could be a confederation, it could be different areas of autonomy where the South has autonomy. But I don't think a separation with 2 sovereign or 3 sovereign entities is going to be the future for Yemen.
Alkharder, why did your STC launch its operation earlier this month, taking new territory, Hadramout and Mara, 2 governorates that they've taken recently? I think it's interesting to note that this is reasonably sparsely populated territory, but contains about 80% of Yemen's oil wealth.
Well, they have adhered to the calls of the southern people in these governorates, who have been calling for some intervention from the SDC since the military, or the first military region over there was actually facilitating and allowing for smuggling, and as well as illicit and illegal oil wells, which were actually supporting a war economy and keeping the status quo. So in addition to that, there was a repression whenever the Hadramis or the people of Hadramout come out to protest or rally. They're faced with live ammunition, such as in 2019 and 2018. These calls have been there for a long time, trying to remove these forces who the Hadrami people viewed as occupation forces, not as local forces made from the or consisting of people from Hadramaut or Al Mahra. The recent calls were dire. In addition to that, and going back to the UAE and SDC connection and partnership, in addition to the KSA, which is the leading force of the Arab coalition. Just
to be clear, you're talking about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That abbreviation, to be clear to everyone. And on that, let me bring in Abdul-aziz. What you've just heard, all of that is seen very differently in Riyadh. Yes.
Yes, it is. And firstly, just to say something very quickly, I think in this coalition to fight the Houthi rebels, Saudi forces, Saudi personnel died, and UAE personnel died as well. And so I would have to say that, this is something that we Saudis will never forget. And the reason why I want to say this is because I think it's very important for me as a Saudi also to try to take some of the venom away from some of the toxic discussions that will be taking place, and that we have to focus on the GCC unity, when we have to focus on Yemeni unity. And this now goes into also directly your question, James. I think when one looks at Saudi and the Saudi statements and how Saudis are viewing this, they have said time and again that the southern cause in southern Yemen is a just cause. It's a legitimate cause. But the situation is that it has to be manifested and brought about in a civil manner and in a political dialogue. The reason why there needs to be a political dialogue is because I think not only Yemen, but also Saudi Arabia's national security interests cannot withstand the rupturing of that political dialogue. That political dialogue and that political framework, and to contain some of these very sensitive discussions, is a matter of national security. And what we've seen from the STC and the STC movement towards these Al Mahra and Hadramaut was something that ruptured that framework. And as a result, I would have to say that even the gentleman, the spokesperson, will have some issues also, and have some just issues about Hadramaut. And it's legitimate, and he has to be listened to. But also, there are other people from Hadramaut that do not agree with the STC, and that they have a different kind of alternative view on the situation and alternative calls. And they do want a particular political situation within unity, but within a unified Yemen. But it has to be discussed. That is the crux of the matter. Now, as soon as that was ruptured, This is where it became a matter of Saudi national security, and it became a matter of regional security. And then it really starts to strike into and connect with other themes that are going around the region. And this is where it becomes a big picture where we have to take a step back and say, what on earth is going on here? And
okay, let me pick that up with Andreas, if I can. Andreas, the regional picture. This is not, is it, only a question of Yemen? For example, the UAE denies it, but most experts say there's plenty of evidence to show that the UAE is actively supporting the rapid support forces in Sudan. The Saudis strongly oppose the RSF. So then you've got two wars where they now seem to be on different sides. And it's not just that, is it?
No, absolutely right. And what happens in Yemen has to be seen in the wider context of what I describe as the axis of secessionists. What we've seen the Emiratis doing since the Arab Spring is very systematically building multi-layered networks of networks in various countries where they try to embed local armed violent non-state actors into a more or less organic cause. And they've been trying to do this in Libya. They started in Libya. They've done it obviously in Yemen. They've done it in Sudan. They're doing it in various breakaway regions in Somalia, most prominently in Somaliland. And what they've created is a regional network. And why I call it the axis of secession is because it's very similar to the axis that the Iranians have built, the Iranian axis of resistance, because it's also based on networks of logisticians, of financiers, of mercenaries, of obviously non-state actors, violent and not violent non-state actors, and commodity traders. And if you put all of this together, then the STC is also a part of this. The war in Yemen is part of that, because mind you, it was RSF fighters who were brought in to fight in Yemen against the Houthis early on. So this axis is all connected. It's all connected all the way up to Libya. And so in this axis in itself is building a regional order that leaves Turkey, that leaves Saudi Arabia, it leaves Qatar, it leaves Egypt outside of that order. It's an order that includes the Israelis, because obviously the STC has had contact with Israel, has contacts with Russia, and all these relationships were introduced by the Emiratis. And the Emiratis are building an axis that is trying to exclude Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is on opposite sides in Sudan when it comes to the UAE, on the opposite side of the UAE in Sudan, obviously in Yemen, in Somalia and Somaliland, a very strong position that the Saudis have taken, that they want a unified Somalia with territorial integrity. But it's even on opposite sides on a lot of issues in Gaza and in Palestine. So that friction that we're seeing now in Yemen is something that is non-negotiable. Sudan might be negotiable for the Saudis because it is far away. But what happens in its backyard in Yemen is a matter of national security, and that's something where the Saudis said enough is enough. And now
okay,
we'll have to see
let me bring in harder on that. You say that there is genuine support there in the south for independence, but is your movement being used as part of an expansionist foreign policy by United Arab Emirates?
Of course not. And I just to clarify as well, any footprint that the UAE and the SDC or the UAE SDC partnership has already liberated the areas from the Houthis or from the Houthi stronghold, just like in the Southern Governorates back in 2015, which was done and as efficient as possible, as well as dismantling all the extremist cells. So any UAE SDC partnership also means a UAE SDC Saudi Arabia partnership, because now the misconception that everyone else is also announcing is that the partnership with the SDC means that you are now anti-Saudi Arabia, and this is incorrect. SDC has been adhering to all Saudi Arabian calls, has been adhering to all dialogue, all peace processes, as well as all of the conferences that the Saudis have commenced. And
okay, Abdul-aziz, I see you want to get in. Your comment on that?
Yeah, well, I wish that was the case. Had it been the case, the Saudis would not have used the force that they did. This is what I will just say. I mean, I don't want to go into enter into a cyclical discussion, but the reason why Saudi Arabia did what it did and it used the measured force that it did was to show that, listen, this is not in accordance with Saudi Arabia, and this is not in accordance with the national security interest of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It was not, and they have made that clear. So while I appreciate what the gentleman is trying to say, and I respect him personally, I have to say I disagree. There was no coordination. And had there been no coordination, then why was there the two boats that were leaving and going into Mukalla had turned off their radars? So, you know, I think there was a conviction from the Saudi leadership that this is now going out of control, that this is now going out of the process that was agreed upon. And now there has to be reminders and basically put force, there has to be a robust response to make sure that everyone goes back to that framework, and that Saudi Arabia now will use that framework and operate within that framework. The framework is crucial.
Let me bring in Andreas, because there's another element we haven't spoken about, which is the response of the rest of the international community and also the US and some of its Western partners. They are partners with the UAE and they're partners with Saudi Arabia. This is a tricky issue, is it not? What should they do to avoid further escalation in Yemen and beyond?
Well, let's be clear here. I mean, a consolidated, united Yemen with territorial integrity and sovereignty is what the international community widely wants. It's really only Israel and the UAE who are the odd ones out, and particularly the UAE are the odd ones out. They're the elephant in the room on all of this. The Omanis, who obviously share the other land border, are a very important broker in Yemen and work very closely with the Saudis, and also support the Saudi claim for a united Yemen and saying this is the only way forward to create stability. The rest of the GCC take a similar position. The Arab world takes a similar position. The United States is in between. They obviously mostly, in the UK as well, they're very much focused on the Houthi issue, but they also understand, I mean, the UK position and the US position is we need to fight the Houthis, and the only way we can do this, the only way we contain them, is if we have territorial integrity. Having a breakaway region now is not in the interest of the international community. And so there's been heavy lobbying going on. Obviously, the STC has been lobbying, the UAE have been lobbying, and the UAE have been paying for a lot of that STC lobbying here in London and in Washington to make a case for the southern cause and southern separation. But actually, that has fallen on deaf ears across the international community. Now, it's up to the Saudis to use their convening power internationally, which the UAE, I don't think, have at the moment, because they are the odd one out. The Saudis have convening power now to bring people around the table and say, here is a strategy forward of how we can build this dialogue, and not just talk about dialogue, but actually have the dialogue and have a plan on the table to negotiate.
OK, thank you very much. And thank you to all of our guests today, Abdul-aziz, Ghashian, Alkharder, Sulaiman and Andreas Krieg. Remember to watch Al Jazeera's ongoing coverage of this story with more context and analysis on aljazeera.com. If you have views on this subject, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or on X, we're at AJ Inside Story. Wherever you're watching this from will determine whether you're still in 2025 or you've already reached 2026. Either way, on behalf of all the team, may I wish you a prosperous and healthy new year ahead. Bye-bye for now.